Killer cyclone outbreak of May 1883. The weather, be it a gentle spring shower or a violent outbreak of tornadoes, is nothing less than fascinating. We are indeed fortunate to live in an age when we often receive advance notice that saves many, many lives. But still, even today, tornadoes claim many lives. Can you imagine even further back, before warning was given, before we had that potential, how horrifying these storms must have been, and how suddenly they would seem to come on. May 1883 saw a massive breakout of cyclones, which indeed claimed many lives in Wisconsin and surrounding areas. I would like to recreate for you here those horrible hours of devastation that took place about 121 years ago. It was Friday, May 21st in Racine, Wisconsin. The weather was unseasonable, very hot and humid, and no doubt there was a feeling in the air that something was not quite right. The air was oppressively heavy, and around 7 o'clock that evening, all hell, so to speak, dropped out of the sky, twisting ravagely through Walworth, Kenosha, and Racine counties. There were a number of tornado funnels sighted beginning in Walworth. Initially, though, the cyclonic funnels were hefty and strong, but no one was killed. The furious storm did a tremendous amount of damage as it tore through Walworth and Kenosha counties. Hundreds of buildings were blown into kindling and scattered for many miles. However, Racine was not so fortunate. In Racine, over 20 people were killed and over 150 buildings were destroyed. These were mostly homes and barns, as the main business district had escaped the major damage. Unfortunately, it was the densely populated side of Racine that met with the most destructive force. Suddenly, at 7 o'clock p.m., the clouds broke and the cyclones bore down to earth with a sound which was compared to the rumbling of 1,000 railroad trains thundering over a bridge. The storm's path of destruction was as wide as a 3.5 football field in many places. Newspapers reported that all brick and frame buildings collapsed like they were made of straw, their sites being marked by nothing more than a pile of rubble. People who saw the storm coming had barely no time to make it to safety of their cellars. The cyclone came so swiftly that many were killed as they were desperately seeking safety. One source reported farmhouses, churches, schoolhouses, barns, orchards, and groves gave way before like so many eggshells of dry weeks and were terrible to behold. In Wheatland, 4 large barns of J.P. Runkle were destroyed and his orchard was torn out by the roots. 15 cattle that were in the barns were carried a distance of 2 miles and were, of course, either killed or injured. An entire home was lifted from its foundations and in total deposited in a tamarack swamp. Those houses in the center of the storm looked as though they had simply exploded and fell into ruins. Some of the homes were turned right around on the foundations, while lighter objects like wagons were swept into Lake Michigan. The cyclone, as it moved from land out over Lake Michigan, presented an amazing spectacle. There were many close calls. Ann Peterson lost her large sheep barn and several sheep. Robert Patterson had just bought another farm near his own. The newly acquired property was destroyed. Across the road, 7 horses were buried under the hay and timbers when his new barns were destroyed, but they were rescued alive and not too seriously injured. Oddly, one of the almost worthless stables nearby, surrounded by Patterson's larger barns, was left untouched with every shingle in place, while all the surrounding buildings were flattened. The most tragic tale was of 2 girls, aged about 10 years old, out gathering some cows in front of Runkle's house when the cyclone picked up one of the girls and carried her about 200 yards, burying her in a mire of slough, leaving only her mouth and nose above the water and mud. The wind had torn every scrap of clothing from her body, and the other girl suffered lifelong injuries, and as her body recovered slowly, her head injuries were permanent, and her parents had to have her placed in an asylum. The storm system did not just affect Wisconsin. There was another tornado reported just before 6 p.m. near Chemung, which is a small village near Harvard in Illinois. According to a newspaper account, a roaring sound was heard, and suddenly the funnel swooped down on the place with fearful speed. Houses were quickly torn apart like so many toys and were whirled about through the air. Large buildings were leveled in an instant. There were few details reported, however, but at least 20 people were injured. Passing to the to the east. The storm passed Belvedere, doing considerable damage there, and here the wind changed to the northeast and widened to about a mile. Lawrence, a small station 6 miles north of Harvard, was badly damaged, and the surrounding county was desolated. At Clinton, Illinois, a large amount of damage was done, and a number of people were killed. The wind then took a southeasterly course and followed up Salt Creek on a line of which many houses were destroyed. And about 6 miles south of Clinton, the wind tore down a house, killing Peter Clifton, his wife, and his little daughter, and fatally hurting another child. Damage at Staunton, Illinois, and other buildings in the vicinity were destroyed. A construction crew of about 25 men on the Springfield and Illinois Southwestern Railway who were camping near Mrs. Olive's house were all seriously hurt. Mr. Cantel, the contractor, and Alva Berry were instantly killed. The worst of the cyclone was reported to have been some 9 miles south of Jacksonville on the Peoria branch of the Wabash Railroad. The storm cloud, in the shape of a column, struck to the south part of the town of Leader, and traveled northeast completely across the business and residence portion of the place, leveling 4 stores, 2 churches, the depot, a repair shop, and 13 dwellings. There were 15 people injured there. Farther to the southeast, farmhouses and barns were leveled to the ground, and the storm extended as far south as Litchfield. Not far from the place, a railroad bridge was swept away, and a passenger train on the Indianapolis and St. Louis Railroad plunged into a ravine. The engineer of the train was killed, and the firemen dangerously scalded, but none of the passengers were injured. The information for this report was secured from a rare copy of the May 21, 1883 issue of the Fitchburg Sentinel. Such rare documents as this are, in a way, like opening a doorway to other times, some happy and some not so much. Of course, the Fujita scale of tornado intensity did not exist back in 1883, but I cannot help from wondering where these tornadoes would fall on that scale. Judging by the amount of damage reported, I would not be surprised if these May 1883 storms were around an F4, which has sustained winds of 201 to 260 miles per hour, and the incredible potential for major damage. Well, that's a short look at the killer cyclone outbreak. Thanks for stopping by.